it.
And we're not going to stop him. Of course we're not going to stop him. Ash Hanley finishes it off.
Jack Bird with his first Leeds try.
Hello there, welcome back to Matchday Live, your Leeds Rhinos game day preview show as we build up to round 25 of the Betfred Super League. Leeds Rhinos heading to the Brewdog Stadium to take on the St Helens. It's a blockbusting clash every time the Rhinos and Saints meet, whether it's at AMT Headingley or whether it is over at the Brewdog Stadium. So tonight, regardless of team news, regardless of form, these two sides will be out to win it all. I'm your host, Dan Hawkhead. A pleasure to have your company as we build up to this one. I'm joined by BBC Radio Leeds' Jack Conlon. As usual, just a note before we start, we had the devastating news this week about Sir Billy Boston from Wigan Warriors, his unfortunate passing. Our condolences go out to all the Wigan fan base, as well as Billy's family as well. A legend of rugby league, a giant of the sport, and so sadly missed. Jack, delving straight into tonight's game. Like we said, Leeds, St Helens, it's always a highlight. It's always the first you circle on the calendar, regardless of how both these sides come into it. Ironically, off the back of wins, tonight is a massive game for both of their campaigns, and more so for Leeds looking at the playoff picture, would you say?
Very much so. I mean, looking at that top 6, top 7 race at the minute, it's still on. It's still on. Even after last week, I think we said, I won't chuck you in, actually. I think I said, actually, that top 6 is sewn up now. I do still stand by that. I do think it will still be that top 6. But, St Helens, with the way that last week's results went, them beating Castleford, Hull KR losing to Toulouse, has really chucked up a bit of excitement in what would otherwise have been a pretty gentle sort of running in regards to that top 6 race. So, Saints still have plenty to play for. A win for them would again just give them that extra little kick as a potential top 6 side, and push them ever so close to Hull KR. They obviously play each other in the final round of the season. If that was a do or die, clash, that'd be some game that. But equally, like you say, for Leeds, obviously, first is still the priority right now. I think they'll have one eye. I think most people have one eye on next week's Wigan game. And why wouldn't you, given where Wigan are as well? But yeah, Saints, given how they've gone this season, they're an easier prospect than you'd probably say a Wigan or someone like that are. But equally, they've managed to find a bit of form in the last couple of weeks. They've backed themselves. Eamon O'Carroll's got them working well, and who knows what they can sort of add to this top 6, this last run in when it comes to those competitive games, and really trying to just cause the odd upset.
And when you look at their form under Eamon O'Carroll, granted he's only had 5 games, but 3 consecutive losses. They've then picked that up and turned that into wins. The biggest you've got to say is against Wakefield. I know that, but they're almost playing themselves back into the fight, aren't they? Regardless of looking at Hull KR's results, which is definitely a helping hand for them. They're playing themselves back into the fight, so it's fair play to the work that they're doing behind the scenes, despite being down on bodies. We'll come on to this in a moment.
Without a doubt, and you mentioned that Wakefield game there. I think it stunned not just Wakefield, but everyone the way they finished that. They looked so much more like the Saints that we know and that we've come to know down the years. A team that are so relentless in attack, so confident, and ruthless as well. They had that ruthless edge in that game. When Wakefield started to shudder a bit, they really took advantage of that, and that went down to mainly a few individuals. But they wouldn't have been in that position already had they not stuck in the fight and in the contest in that game, which is something that they've not been able to do too much this season, hence why they find themselves in 7th. I mean, if they were to miss out on the playoffs, just to sort of put it into perspective, it's the first time they wouldn't be in the playoffs in the Super League era. They have never not been in a Super League playoffs, which, just tells you how their season has gone. So, that in itself would be a pretty big story, and, would obviously prompt or continue the sort of reshaping and the rebuild that they're looking at next season under, as we now know, Kevin Walters, the Australian
massive
coach,
signing coming in.
Huge. But, they've certainly up with themselves this season. They know that. But, I mean, regardless, they'll be looking to finish with a flourish. And they've beaten Wakefield. They beat Cass pretty convincingly last week. They'll fancy themselves going into this game.
And looking at Leeds off the back of such a great performance against York, probably is expected. I know we built it up kind of to be a little bit tighter than I think we honestly expected it to be. A 6-point blowout isn't a bad thing, judging what we saw at AMT Headingley, what we talked about on last week's show. Seeing just a bit more fluidity, seeing the Brad Arthur side really going out there to get the points. It was nice to see, wasn't it, at the LNAR Community Stadium?
I think it's a game they needed, and I think, with all respect to York, it's a game that for Leeds came around at a good time against, on paper and on the field as well, a weaker opposition than Lee. I think in that League game we saw a frustrated Leeds team and a frustrated spine in particular. This Rhinos team I don't think really ticks without that spine being on, of Connor, Croft and Miller. As I say, we saw them frustrated against Lee, trying to do it themselves at times. They just weren't in that game. Whereas I think against York, it was the perfect opportunity to sort of reset, go again, work to structure, and just get back into that groove and that style that has worked so well for them this season. As I say, against a side like York, who you can attack, who, as we mentioned last week, largely for, in games this season have stayed in the contest. Only you'd probably put that game last week on a par with the defeat to Wigan that they experienced earlier this season, where they were just completely blown away, particularly in that first half. And that was the same against Leeds last week. So for the Rhinos, it was a good time to have a match like that, to just get yourself back into the groove ahead of this last 3. But the challenge now, obviously, is firstly building that into this St Helens game and continuing that form and, keeping that same style, and then obviously taking it into Wigan the week after. Anyone
impress you? Obviously, Riley Lum stole the headlines with 3 tries. Great for him and getting back in the side and doing what he does best. Anyone really impress you after obviously that League game? But looking at this last bit of a running, anyone else stand out for you?
I thought Lockie Miller. To be honest, I thought he just looked back to the Lockie Miller that we like to see. I think I mentioned last week against, on the back of the League game, that he has this habit of when things aren't going Leeds' way, and it comes from a good place. I think that's clear to see, but of trying to do it himself, and you see a lot of that lateral running, just desperately trying to find a gap. He's that kind of player that he loves playing in that space so much. He's always desperate to find it, even when it doesn't present itself as easily. And I think that's what we saw against Lee, whereas last week he was just so much more direct with his running. There was very little of that lateral movement. And he got on to the end of some really nice moves and, created some really nice stuff as well, particularly for those outside backs. So you're right to mention Riley Lum. I thought that was one of his better games this season. Just about finishes that first try, doesn't he? And just then about leaps fantastically for the second. Really nice inside ball for Ash Handley's try as well. It was Ash Handley's
Chris
try.
Hankinson.
Chris Hankinson's try, sorry. Down that left edge. Really nice bit of deception, actually, to join the fullback when he was on that break before giving the ball inside. So he was great. But, yeah, I think if you're going to pick someone else out, for me, Lockie Miller was really impressive.
Zach Lloyd getting a lot of extensive minutes. You said he would start last week, but didn't quite. But still, when you look at his second half performance, he's given himself the credentials to put himself in the conversation, much like we saw with Presley Cassell last year coming through. We saw him get a run of starts when he had the opportunity. Granted, the Rhinos have gone out and bought him Matt Lodge, and hopefully we've got some players coming back, 2 of which are back today. But Zach Lloyd's putting himself back in the picture, and that second half alone really showcased. I know that James McDonnell spoke on the Leeds Rhinos podcast this week. He's getting himself in those conversations with the players in the team that it matters, and he's getting his sort of kudos up. It couldn't be long before we see him potentially start.
He seems like he's got a real maturity, which for a player of 18 can be rare. I remember him speaking after his debut to us on BBC Radio Leeds, and you often find with players of that age, they can be quite timid and nervous, and that's fair enough. And that just is sort of the nature of it. But he was really confident in the way that he spoke, and that's in front of a camera and to the media. So when he's in that, I guess, more comfortable environment of his teammates, that doesn't surprise me at all that he's in those sorts of conversations. But no, I thought he looked good again at the weekend, getting those extra minutes, getting that full 40 minutes under his belt in the second half. Once again, didn't look out of place. Punched some holes in the York defence, which I think is really impressive to see. I did say he'd start. I thought he would start. Instead, though, I guess the curveball that Brad Arthur went with was starting Prez de Cassel, and I thought that also worked really well.
Yes.
I think, again, that's a real dilemma and debate as to who your best starting loose forward is now, because he's in the mix, as is Cameron Smith, as is Callum Watkins when everyone's fit. So I thought he worked really well as that sort of ball-playing loose forward. Like we see with Watkins, like we see with Smith, who, again, by the way, was brilliant.
He really came out with shell again, didn't he?
I mean, that footwork to make the break again for Lockie Miller's try was fantastic. That's something that we really like to see from Cameron Smith, and that is when he's at his best, just taking on defences through the middle like that, making the use of tired middle defenders. But just to go back to that point, I thought Prez de Cassel looked really, really impressive starting in the middle. First start of this season, is that, I think? I'm right in saying? Possibly.
Potentially.
First start in a while, anyway.
Yes.
He took to it like a duck to water and just looked really comfortable there. So I guess it just throws up another debate, doesn't it, about who gets picked. Zach Lloyd, I mean, we'll get onto this shortly when we look at the 21-man squad, but you'd imagine he might miss out this week. But I think...
Maybe just...
Going forward, though, what a brilliant bit of development for him. Having this little string of games, just getting a taste for what Super League life is like on a regular basis, and I think that'll stand him in good stead for next season and onwards.
Showcasing just what is here in the future, I think, with Prez de Cassel, giving him that opportunity, and looking where obviously Cameron Smith's going to Wakefield presents a great opportunity. Moving back to St Helens, tonight's opponents, a real season of two halves. They started the year in incredible form. When you look at the start of the year, they won 8 out of 10 games under Paul Rowley to start the year, and you think this is the revamped St Helens. They're back. They're not that they were bad under Paul Wellens, but this is more of the St Helens that we're looking to see. They're beating Wigan. They're getting the major wins. Lost here in a bit of a poor run of form that then saw Paul Rowley removed prior to the derby game against Wigan. Looking at that potentially set up now the Kevin Walters move. Are you surprised that they made the move when they did, and rather than letting the season go out, or do you think with the opportunity of bringing Kevin Walters and just lock all that up, it actually made more sense for Rowley to go when he did?
It's a really tough debate, and obviously the only people that really know the answer to that are those inside those four walls at the Brewdog Stadium.
Of course.
And that hierarchy at St Helens. But I think it's strange, isn't it, with St Helens, because, and I've heard this sort of debated externally as well about Paul Rowley and the situation there. He's very much a coach that likes to come in and change things. You look what he did at Salford, for example. Very, very much got his own players in. They took on his style. He very much dictated that. St Helens are a club, obviously, with the illustrious history they've got, that there's a certain way of doing things, and they are an institution, similar to a Leeds, similar to a Wigan. And you perhaps there have an example of two parts to a puzzle that just don't fit together in Rowley and St Helens as a club, and the way that they do things. And I think that is probably what you could put that demise down to, and the reason why they ended up parting ways. And it remains to be seen what happens next season when Kevin Walters comes in. I think on paper, and the sort of headline grabber that it is as an appointment is interesting. It's something that I think certainly if you talk about from a PR perspective, it'll get, it'll generate that excitement around St Helens, won't it? And the fans will be pleased with that appointment. We'll see how he does when he comes in. I think that's the real test, obviously, is the actual impact that he makes on that squad and that they make on the competition on the back of that. So, you look at his sort of domestic record, it's fine. It's not amazing. The sole season he had in Super League with Catalans, they finished bottom of the table, I think I'm right in saying. So that in itself, I guess, doesn't bode well, but he's obviously since, that was over 10 years ago, so he's had, plenty more experience under his belt over in the NRL, with the Origin side as well, with Queensland, and now with Australia. So, he's not someone that is he knows what it's like to be part of winning sides, of successful sides around really high quality players. So they will treat that appointment with a good degree of optimism, as they well should, with someone of Kevin Walters is standing in the game. So we'll see how that pans out. But I think this season, unfortunately for them, when they look to move in a different direction, it just seemingly hasn't worked.
And it'd be interesting looking at which coaches will win Super League next year. It really adds to what's now a growing roster of really powerful head coaches. Now you look at our competition, you look at Brad Arthur here at Leeds, you look at Matt Peate's record at Wigan is undoubtedly up there. Sam Burgess, granted how long he stays at Warrington for, of course. You've then got Steve McNamara at Hull. It's a real good core of head coaches, and you've got Lee Breers as well, who we will know very well from his time with Brisbane, of course, being an assistant there. Looking at Eamon O'Carroll, though, coming into this game, and obviously he took over as interim head coach. He's obviously had a bit of coaching experience with Bradford and etc. But it seemingly has got them back to where they need to be, despite a growing injury list. 12 players are currently missing out of their sort of top 30 when you look at that. Running quickly through them, you look at Darryl Clark, Matty Lees, Curtis Sirenen, George Delaney, Matt Whitley, Jake Wingfield, Lewis Murphy misses this week, Noah Stevens, Jake Burns, Owen Dagnall and Jed Cartwright. That's some injury list when you've been handed the reins and told, get what you can out this year.
Without a doubt, but they are somehow managing to soldier on. And I think, again, if you look at sort of small wins and benefits from this season, I think you look at some of those young players that have come through. Matty Evans, I think, looks really tidy off the bench. Young prop, had a bit of time on loan at Salford this season, but as just by circumstance had to step up and step in, because I think one area where they've been particularly light is the middle forwards at times. And he's one that has had to sort of step up and fill that gap, and by all accounts has looked really good. Billy Keeley is another one, young back rower.
He's looked really good.
Looked really tidy. I think Jake Davis, he's had a bit more of a run. He's sort of been in and around that 21-man squad all season, and due to injuries has had more of a run in the side. But again, I think he's a real find, and has really come to the fore this year. So they've that is one real benefit I think they've had out of this season, and just out of necessity had to blood some of these youngsters. Which, I mean, again, going forward, you look at the benefits that'll hand them next year and beyond. When they do have a full complement of players, they know they've got a decent stock of youngsters that have tasted that bit of Super League, and will be able to come in and fill in the gaps that are needed. So I guess for future proofing, it sort of bulks out the squad a bit, if nothing else. But I think they've sort of, certain players have had to fall on their feet a bit. Some have, some haven't. I think Harry Robertson is one that has. I know we'll talk about him a bit more very shortly. But I guess another plus is that they found his position, which is in the halves. Yeah. They've managed to stumble upon that and decided that is where he's best used. So there are certainly positives they can take out of this season. I think it's not entirely a write-off of a year. But as it looks right now, they're probably not going to make the top six, which in their book is obviously a huge disappointment. So it will probably go down as a poor season, but that doesn't mean there aren't bright sparks that you can take into next year.
Daniel Saluka for Feta as well, not just to hone in more when you talk about middle forwards. You've been impressed since he's gone. I know he's caught the eye of a few pundits this year. Just obviously mid-season signings, tough to get up and get going, but he seems to have provided that sort of punch when you've not got an Ignatius Parsi, who obviously left the club halfway through the year.
He's been tidy enough, I think, and I think with players like that come over mid-season, particularly when you're talking about the sort of enforcer-type power props, I think the real test of them and when you really see where they're at and where they fit into a side is after a full pre-season. So I think for someone like that to see the real potential he's got in this Saints side, look at next year, look what he's like after going through pre-season. It doesn't always work with players. I mean, you look at Lazarus Falepu, who Lee have signed. He played a handful of games, didn't really hit the ground running like they hoped. Went on loan to Oldham. He's now on loan at Cass for the rest of this season. He might be a completely different prospect come 2027, but as it stands, Lee don't really see him as part of their plans for the rest of this year. So, he's just one example. It does work for some, doesn't work for others. But I think with Saluka for Feta, yes, he's looked okay. But I think the real sort of test of him, or when we'll really see what he's made of, will be next year.
It'll be interesting as well. Funny you mentioned the Lee Leopards. They're one of the teams that Saints take on down this final stretch. Their last 3 games: Leeds at home, Lee away, Hull KR at home. Like you've rightly pointed out, that Hull KR game at the Brewdog Stadium could be huge,
could be a dead rubber.
Or it could be dead rubber.
We don't know, do we? And that's the beauty of this point of the season. By that final game, we'll obviously know what's on it, but right now, you can sort of make your predictions and try and do the maths a little bit, but rugby league is obviously unpredictable at times, isn't it? So who knows how things will shape up come that last game.
Rugby league is also undefeated, so if it should, let's go with it being like it should be a good contest. Hopefully, fingers crossed. Moving on to those 21-man squads, we will get through St Helens just to start with, and then go on to the Rhinos. 2 changes for both sides coming into this one. Saints rightfully including Johnny Lomax, who this week announced his retirement come the end of the season, a real illustrious career in the red and white. He replaces Jackson Hastings, obviously on a ban. And then David Clemmer is a welcome return. When we talk about forwards coming back in, he replaces Oscar Knox in terms of the ins and outs. But he will be massive for that forward pack, won't he, Clemmer? Then looking at how he performed here at AMT Headingley, he'll know that he needs to really get into your Matt Lodges, your Mikhail Edskis, your Tom Oroys, the guys we've been absolutely badgering on this year, and saying, once they get on the front foot, once they get rolling, they're tough to stop. Clemmer will be as important for Saints' forward pack in helping them do that, won't he?
He will, and he'll just have that bit of experience as well, take the pressure off your likes of Matty Evans, for example, Billy Keeley, Chris Matangi, who have sort of had to, off the bench, be those impact subs or those impact forwards. He just reduces the pressure on them a bit. Probably gives Eamon O'Carroll a bit of a different rotation as well when he looks at his middles. They've been running with Alex Walmsley, Daniel Saluk Fafita and Jacob Hurst as sort of the starting middle 3, and then having to roll them off with those youngsters that I mentioned in the past couple of weeks. So, he at least just alleviates or gives an option there, as well as, potential rotation. Whether he starts or not, I think will be interesting. I guess, in fairness, whether he plays or not as well. Saints have had a habit at times this season of naming players in the 21-man squad who are coming back from injury and then sort of deciding it's just too early for them. And I think that might be the case with Lomax as well.
So do you think that's what happened with Lomax today?
I do, yeah. He might, who knows, we might be shocked and he might play, but I think the sort of obvious decision with no Jackson Hastings on the back of what they had last week is probably to go with Jack Wellsby in the halves, which they probably don't want to do because, if you talk about St Helens and conversations and debates that have been had all season, it is where you put Jack Wellsby and Tristan Taylor. Yes. And just when it seems like they've found a place that they quite like them, they might be forced to change again. So I think most Saints fans would probably want Johnny Lomax to be fit and be in that squad and be partnering Harry Robertson in the halves. Whether or not he makes it fitness-wise, we'll wait and see. And otherwise, I think it will be Wellsby, in that scrum half position.
It'd be huge if he played against the Rhinos, and there's no bigger game that if Johnny Lomax wanted to play, it'd be against the Rhinos, I think, judging on the history between the two. Leeds, on the other hand, will bob that team just below us now for you. Great returns in Jack Bird's back from HIA, Danny Levi after that awful accident at Castleford that obviously seen him ruled out for the past few weeks. They're both back, like you said earlier, just bolsters both the bench and offers a potential change in the outside backs. Do you see Jack Bird coming back in? I'm guessing you do. It's just who for?
I think that's a real point of contention, is that outside back area. Jack Bird, you'd imagine, will play. I think that's probably almost a certainty. It's how the other pieces move around him then, because I think he is an out-and-out right centre, isn't he? We've seen him play on the left, but he is a centre. When you've got Ash Handley and Jack Bird fit, they almost put themselves in those centre spots. That's not to discount Harry Newman, but he's the more movable one.
He's played pretty well on the wing when asked this year.
Exactly, but for starters, who do you put on the other wing? And then which side do they go on? Is the real question for me, because your options then are Harry Newman, Ryan Hall, and Riley Lum. All have got credentials, to play this week. Riley Lum, who you imagine would be the natural player to drop out, scored 2 tries and got an assist against York.
3 tries and an assist.
Sorry, of course he did. Yeah, got 3 tries and assist, and he got a hat trick. That in itself, do you drop a player who got a hat trick the week before, albeit in a blowout scoreline? Ryan Hall, experienced character, looked better last week than he did against Lee. on that right-hand side where he's played all of this season? Do you move him back to the left where him and Ash Handley were exposed by the Leopards a couple of weeks ago and put Newman on the right? Do you put Newman on the left to try and shore that up and keep Hall on what seemingly now is his preferred side? I think that's such a tough decision, tough debate, tough jigsaw to try and put together. I think that's a really, really tough area to try and decide in. So, he's got 5 options there for 4 positions ultimately. And that's just question one when it comes to those outside backs. So that's a really interesting area for me. And Danny Levi coming back in as well, I think is a real boost. I think he offers something so much different to what Jared O'Connor does. And I think when Leeds have looked at their best through the middle this season, it has been when you've got those two either rotating or on the pitch at the same time. You've got O'Connor starting, just to lay that platform. And then Levi coming on with 10-15 minutes until half-time to, use that pace and deception that he's got out of dummy half to really cause a nightmare for those tired middle forwards. Sometimes with O'Connor on the pitch as well. We've seen Brad Arthur do that, haven't we? Played them both at once. So I think that's a real boost to have Levi back, just because of what he brings in attack and what Leeds lose when he's not there. So for me, he's a no-brainer. I think he probably comes back onto the bench for Zach Lloyd. I think he drops out.
Okay.
Unfortunately, which is no slight on him. As we've already mentioned, he's been great. I think in the stints he's had, but I just think when you look at the hierarchy, I think he is the natural player to drop out and move to 18th man. So I think that one almost decides itself. And then you have the big debate, as we've already touched on, is in the outside backs and who on earth is picked.
Who do you think is going to be on the wing? Who do you think moves around the pack? Let us know. Just your squad picks just before we get team news. That is coming up very shortly. I think whether it's Zach that drops out, whether it's Ryder that drops out, there is the extra, I'd say big game. It's not quite a Super League game, but the reserves, obviously, they have their semi-final against Warrington. So it's still a tough test, regardless if they play Super League, if they play on Sunday for the reserves, either or. 150 appearances for Jared O'Connor as well. 150 career appearances for Matt Lodge. Nice, though, when we talk about these guys in Danny Levi and Jack Bird coming back in, you look at it now and you go, well, there's only really Keenan Palacia, James McDonald and Mike Acevo still to come back. Hopefully should be in the next 2-3 weeks or so. That then builds very nicely for whether it's Hull FC here, whether it's even Wigan if we can get 1 or 2 of them back for that, but more looking at that semi-final. Leeds, if this has been the injury patch that we've had in 2026, compared to some other teams like St Helens, it's been a breeze.
Without a doubt, and it's really interesting when you look at the squad that Leeds could have on paper going into those playoffs, and I think the benefit they will more than likely have as well is that week off in the first week of the playoffs, so that again any bruised and battered players, any little knocks that players have got, they've just got that extra bit of time to rehab, reset, recover from, and go into that semi-final when it comes around, which I think will be so exciting. I think there's something about Leeds this season, and certainly when you speak to fans and you see the opinions of fans, there's a feeling this year like they haven't had in a long old while, that they haven't had since, I guess, 2017. The COVID season when they won the Challenge Cup, for example. Those moments of memories now that more than 5 years have passed since then. So it's been a fair old while since there's been this feeling, but a feeling as well when. I'm also a feeling of building, and the fact that this has been something that's been coming for a while now. It's been a slow burn really under Brad Arthur. You look at when Rowan Smith took them to the grand final, and as much as that was an achievement, they were the form team that season. They weren't a team. The foundations weren't there for that squad to get to Old Trafford and win at Old Trafford. They obviously didn't, but they were a team that year built on momentum game to game, which can take you so far, but this feels different for me, and I think it does probably for a lot of the Rhinos fans, in that this has been coming for some time now. This isn't a 6-month project. This is a good 2+ year project that is seeming to now really gain some traction and potentially put them in that favourite spot to do it at Old Trafford. So, we're still a few weeks away. We are still a few weeks away. We won't get too carried away just yet, but it does feel like there's something building, even when they've had these little knockbacks throughout the season, which there has been. Look at the league game, look at the Hull FC game, way back. A couple of others in between, the Wigan game as well. They lost the Wakey match.
Castleford.
Castleford being a really, really important one, actually. it still feels like they've always had control, and at no point has the wagon been about to fall off the tracks. So I think it's really exciting when you look at this last few games. There's a lot of optimism you can go in with to every single one of them. If they do put themselves in a position where they get that first week off, imagine the sort of the build-up at that semi-final we'll have. It'll probably be here as well at Headingley. So there's a lot to look forward to, I think, in this next couple of months. We'll just have to see how it all pans out, won't we?
A semi-final we won't have had in over 10 years as well. When you look at, it was 2017, of course. Yeah. I'm thinking of far too back to the big game against St Helens that we won back in 2015 on our way to the grand final. Obviously played Hull here in 2017. Focusing back on Saints who look to derail the Rhinos and be that banana skin. We've used that buzzword again. Harry Robertson's a real great place to start in terms of players that they are going to target and will need to have big games. And he is someone who, we chatted pre-show, you look at the York game, granted they lost that one, but Harry Robertson really takes games by the scruff of the neck when he knows he can really guide that Saints team around the park. Do you see that's because he's moved into the halves that he's been able to do that?
I think so, yeah. It's the sort of classic case, and you hear a lot of NRL sort of pundits and fans say this. You want your best players to have their hands on the ball as much as is humanly possible. And that's what they've ended up doing with Robertson this season. They've chucked him back into that halves role where, by all accounts, he played a lot in academy reserves. Yes. Came through then to the first team as a fullback, into the centre spot then, but has now finally, I think, found his home at 6, and that is where they need to play him, because I think we've seen this season, particularly the second half of the season, when he has dropped in there, he's just changed the way they attack. And every time he gets his hands on the ball, he's dangerous. I mean, the signs have been there, I think, for a long time. You think back to what he did to the Rhinos here, the end of last season, the game that shall not be named, almost, if we'll put it that way. But it's his dancing feet and his offload that arguably started that move for the try that ended up winning them the game. So the signs have always been there in terms of that elusiveness that he's got and that just natural ability to beat a man. And I think he's shown that again in recent weeks. You look at his performance, I think against York was a real standout one where they lost the game to St Helens, but he was absolutely outstanding. The reason that game was as close as it was solely because of Harry Robertson and the way that he played. I think he set up a try for it. Might have been possibly Tristan Saylor, where they were attacking the away end, and he breaks from deep, just off some footwork, creates something out of nothing, and they end up scoring. And again, it sort of nudges them back into the game. And he's that kind of player who can, I think, just turn a game in a split second with a bit of movement, bit of footwork, just something he does. He's one of those players. I think the more that he matures, the more we'll see that. Quite understated as well. You don't hear from him often. He's not a particularly forthcoming player when it comes to that side of the game. I mean, I guess you look on the flip side at Jake Connor, for example, who is very he's got that confidence, hasn't he? He's got that swagger about him. Robertson's a bit of a quieter player. Maybe that's his age. Who knows? Maybe it'll evolve into something like that. But he's certainly got all the skills and all the characteristics of a player who, if Saints keep him around for as long as they can do, will be a pivotal part of whatever rebuild they end up on. Harry Robertson will be at the heart of that because he is the kind of player that can break a game for you. And I think when you look down that Saints team list going into this game, if you look at one player that you're potentially worried by or that Leeds should be worried by, it would be Harry Robertson.
When you look at, funny you talk about him being a central part of that rebuild reports, obviously Wakefield very much pushing for his signature. Interested just to see if anything does become of that in the off-season. A couple of stats to back up your points here. So first in tackle busts for this year for St Helens. Second in terms of carries and metres. Likes getting through the work. Obviously transitioned out the centre, has worked himself in a half-back position, and will be someone who will be working very closely with Tristan Saylor in particular. 3 tries against Wakefield, sort of a headline for him, but had a great game against Cass last week too. He's one of those players that seems to cop a lot of critics, but actually, when you look at his workload and you look at what he does in games for St Helens, he's probably one of the reasons why they're still in this fight.
He is. I think he must be such a frustrating player to watch if you are of a Saints persuasion, because he does so many good things, but at the same time, there's some really simple things that he seems to get wrong. I think again, if you just look at some of the stats, I think he's somewhere in the top 20 for missed tackles in Super League this season, about 70 odd, I think. Errors as well, he's relatively up there, but.
Well, you rightfully pointed out I think back to the show in round 13, you rightfully pointed out his attack versus his defence are two very different things, aren't they?
Yeah, they are, and you probably with a player like that, you accept that. You accept those shortcomings for what he really does offer you when it comes to those brilliant moments in attack. I mean, again, you look at him in the past 2 games, the Wakefield match in particular 2 weeks ago, where they blew them away in that last 20 minutes. That was largely down to Tristan Saylor and just some of his brilliance and that ability to just play what's in front of him. And I usually hate the phrase eyes up rugby, but genuinely doing that, just seeing what's in front of him and attacking with no fear, and that is why someone like him is so dangerous. He's obviously got that acceleration, that blistering pace. He very much fits that mould of the modern day fullback that we're seeing nowadays be so successful, in that they're quite diminutive, but got the pace and got the agility to beat opposition players, beat players one-on-one as well. So again, he comes under that category of players that when you look down that squad list, he's another one that, like Robertson, you look at and think he could cause some problems, he could be dangerous, he could have a real effect on this game. So I think in Robertson and Saylor there, you've got 2 really, really dangerous men. It's just whether or not everyone around them hits those same standards, because I think for Saints this season, in large parts, that has been their problem, in that you've had 1 or 2, 3 players that have stood out for them, whereas everyone else hasn't hit that same level. Which
isn't something we've ever seen before, I would argue, when you look at those St Helens teams of particularly recent history that have been so great. Do you think, obviously they're missing Jackson Hastings today, and I think back to I think it was the Wakefield game in particular, where he did that little dab kick back across and Saylor's there to collect the score. Do you see those potential, judging who plays in the halves, whether we'll go with it being Wellesby, taking a wild guess here on Matchday Live, do you think that actually what Saylor does depends on who he's playing with? Because he seems to be forming a nice relationship with Hastings. I know he's only here for this year, but that seems to work. Do you think that maybe moves him around or changes a few little things?
I think it's part of the problem that we've seen this season with the Wellesby and Saylor conversation, in that I think when they are both sort of in ball dominant areas, i.e. through the middle of the field, when they're in that spine, expected to see the ball more, they just don't seem to work as well. Whereas when Wellesby drifted out to centre last week, much more regimented in where you sort of place yourself on the pitch, I think that sort of getting him out of the way works, I think, for a Tristan Saylor. I think just on the Jackson Hastings point, I think he will be a big miss. Now, he's had a lot of critics this season, and rightly so for some of the things he's done. And I saw a comment from a St Helens fan this week, actually, who sort of pointed out that their issue with him hasn't necessarily been the on-field stuff. It's more his leadership as a captain, and the way he's gone about that business. Now, that's for St Helens fans to say and not us. But
absolutely,
I think when you look at the punch last week on Tyler Dupree that has seen him banned and potentially has ended his St Helens career, depending on what they do after this season, that's probably an example of that and of the negatives of him. But I mean, on field, he's leading their stats for assists. I think he's second in Super League for assists. So he clearly has a mark on the game and does a lot for them in terms of that attacking style and the attacking side. So I think he will be a big miss when you look just at the fundamentals of the way they play. And I guess the challenge is then on a Wellesby or a Lomax to step into those shoes, the sizable ones that they are. So I know what you're getting at, and I do think that the way Saylor plays is different when you've got a Hastings who, again, you mentioned that little chip kick. He's just got an eye for it, hasn't he? He just knows he knows when to execute it and how to execute it, and how to just make that happen straight away. It's that sort of rugby league instinct that he's got that I don't think, certainly as a halfback, your Wellesby or your Lomax have, and I think that's probably the big miss you get with him.
There we go. We will have to see just who lines up in that vacant number 7 shirt for St Helens today. Looking at this last little stretch for Leeds, it seems like we always keep coming back round to you looking at that Wigan game, and yes, it's going to be as big as I think everyone's billing it up to be, but when you look at these final 3 games of Saints today, Wigan next week, Hull FC the week after, this is funny if I'm writing a little bit for Wigan for next week for our matchday programme, and you're looking at Matt Pete's side of haven't lost a game since the Challenge Cup final back at the end of May, which is just remarkable as it is. But they're a club, and they've been a side who really have made a habit of getting these wins and getting some wins over the line during this real crucial point of the year. For Leeds now, they need to do this, don't they? Not just looking at today's game, but looking at these last two games. Actually, getting wins and good performances is almost paramount at this stage of the season, and it will be massive starting tonight.
It'll be huge, and we've already sort of touched on it, haven't we? That build that you've got to sort of have into the playoffs, and I don't know how much that'll be on Brad Arthur and the squad's minds. When it comes to looking a bit further forward, because they've naturally got jobs to do before then. They've got a league leader shield to chase still and to try and win. Yeah. And I do think to do so, they'll have to win every single one of these last few games. They really will, or at least not lose them. They will have to do that in this last three for me. I think a win over St Helens will give them a massive footing. Again, it's a side that, as we've already mentioned, probably won't be in the top six, but certainly in that top six conversation still, if you like, on the back of last week. So I think that'd give them a big boost going into the Wigan game. Different prospect, obviously, next week, and that for me is still, and I think we've banged on about it all season. That for me is still the real
test.
Acid test as to where they are. And I think the fact that comes so close to the playoffs could either be a benefit or could work against them. We'll have to see just how it pans out. So it's a huge 3 weeks, not just for Leeds but for everyone in Super League, particularly those that are in the top six conversation. It's just exciting, isn't it, when it gets to this stage and it really starts to hot up, and the playoffs and the grand final are just sort of, they come into vision, don't they? They come into sort of touching distance. This is when it really starts to get exciting. So, yeah, what a prospect we've got in front of us.
We do indeed, and excitement, like Jack has absolutely banged on to the point there, is building. If you've not got your tickets yet for either of the last two home games here against Wigan or Hull FC, get online now, tickets.therhinos.co.uk. I know Wigan is selling extremely well, so make sure you snap up whatever tickets you can get and support the boys. Now, just a reminder as well, we have our two fan votes for this year's awards. Your Fans Player of the Year and Try of the Year is just closing. They both close on Sunday. There's been some great selections to pick from this year in terms of tries, Jack. In terms of your Fans Player of the Vote, it could go to anyone, couldn't it? There's at least a host of about 5 or 6 names that are potentially up there.
Is this you putting me on the spot now?
This is me putting you on the spot. Unless you voted already, that is.
I think Jake Connor is the obvious one. I think otherwise for the Rhinos, James McDonald has been very good. Chris Hankinson, I think, has possibly been he's probably your dark horse for that award. I'm going to James McDonald.
Oh, there we go. Not the Swiss Army knife, Chris Hankinson. Get online now. Go onto the website. Those stories are at the top of the site. Make sure you fill in the form and register your vote, because they all count, especially for the Try of the Year, because currently the shortlist of 15 will be going down to a shortlist of 5, which will then be available from Monday for you to vote for the final winner. So make sure you get online and get your votes in. Jack, pleasure to have your company once again on Matchday Live. We've got, if there's no way, or if you're not heading over to the Brewdog Stadium tonight, we're on Sky Sports Action and Sky Sports Plus. So make sure you're tuning in on there to watch all the tries and all the action and all the drama, as it always is. If you're travelling out and about, our great friends at BBC Radio Leeds always got us covered, Jack. You guys have got full match commentary?
We have, yeah. James Dayton and Barry Eaton once again, your commentary team. That'll be on all BBC Radio Leeds frequencies and on BBC Sounds as well, online. Coverage starting at 7 o'clock.
No one better to take you through the action than our great friends at BBC Radio Leeds and the awesome James Dayton. Well, if you're heading over to the Brewdog Stadium, have a safe trip over. We hope that the Rhinos can get the win for you. Again, my thanks to Jack for being on today's show. My name's been Dan Hawkhead, and team news for you is coming next.